a lot of the uh, writers of the past stress the importance of history, and a lot of those with an agenda want to get rid of the history. One of the things, sort of bringing this all together, that in times of crises, people panic and they're willing to give up their freedoms to have to somebody promising to fix it. 500 years ago, Italy was a bunch of city states: Venice, Genoa, Naples, Florence, Siena, and these city states all had armies and navies and fought. And a guy named Machiavelli thought, well, gee, if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting. So his end was good. So he writes a book called The Prince, where he advocates the end justifies the means. So it's such a good end to unify Italy and stop the infighting that any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince conquers a city, the people in that city would hate him. But if the prince pays criminals ahead of time to kill cows, burn barns, smash windows, set things on fire, the people will panic and cry out for help. The prince will come in, get rid of the very people he bribed to create the crisis. Nobody will know the better for it, and everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's good marketing. You create the need and fill it. You go around the back of the house, set it on fire, go around the front of the house, sell a fire extinguisher. They'll pay anything for it and even thank you for being there. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate control. It's more recently worded, you never want a good crisis to go to waste. It's an opportunity to do things you thought you could not do before. Rahm Emanuel, who was the chief of staff for Obama. Anyway, so we got Machiavelli. And then we got the early 1800s Germany. Germany was not Germany. It was a bunch of kingdoms: Saxony, Bavaria, Prussia, and they fought. And so after Napoleon had conquered Europe, the king of Prussia said, well, we want to strengthen our state. And he got a philosopher named Hegel, taught at the University of Berlin. And he comes up with a way of taking power from the people, concentrating it into the hands of the state. And it's called dialectics, Hegelian or Hegelian dialectics. And Darwin adopted his ideas, but a dialectic is a triangle. One corner of the triangle is a thesis. The opposite corner is an antithesis, and the top corner is a synthesis or synthesis. It sounds complicated, but it's not. In other words, you start off with the status quo, you create an antithesis, you create a problem that's real bad, and then everybody's happy to settle for your answer that's half as bad. So who was a student at the University of Berlin? But Karl Marx. He was actually a member of the young Hegelians. And so Karl Marx says, well, gee, how do you create a problem that's real bad? You send in agitators, agent provocateurs, community organizers, labor organizers. Their job is to find people with grievances and stir them up to riot. And when the panic spreads, people will surrender their freedoms, and you can concentrate power. And then that synthesis becomes the new thesis starting point. Then you create another problem that's real bad, and everybody's happy to settle for your answer that's half as bad. Then you create another problem. You keep creating these problems, and each time people give up a little more of their independence to have the problem solved, and power gradually goes from the individual to the state. And so the Karl Marx idea is you organize the proletariat against the bourgeois, which is the working class against the business owners. Organize poor against the rich, blacks against the whites, Catholics against the Protestants, Muslims against the Christians, Hutus against the Tutsis. You really don't care who the two sides are. And you really don't care what the issues are. You just want a destabilizing crisis that makes everybody panic. Anyway, I fast forward through some ideas, but we can't pass up the 1920s. Germany was a republic, the Weimar Republic, and somebody started a party called the National Socialist Workers' Party, and it was Adolf Hitler. And his party had a violent arm to it. A group of agitators that would cause problems. They were called brown shirts. They were nicknamed Sturmabteilung, which means stormtroopers, because they would storm into the meetings of Hitler's opponents and disrupt the meeting. And then they would lock arms. There's pictures of them locking arms and blocking access to buildings and blocking streets. And then they go into the cities and smash the windows and loot and set on fire over 7,000 Jewish stores in the night of broken glass. And then their capital gets set on fire, the Reichstag. And this crisis makes everybody in Germany panic, and they want somebody to come along and fix it. And so Hitler usurps the power. He blames his political opponents for the crimes, and he has them round up the censored, ostracized, locked away, and shot without a trial. When the dust settles, Hitler has no opposition, and he rules as a dictator. So it transitioned Germany from a republic to a dictatorship because he had this violent gang creating problems.
Nice guy.
After World War II, Germany has to give independence to its former colonies. It had some in Africa and the Far East. And France gave up its colonies. Britain gave up its colonies. And these colonies turned into brand new countries with brand new leaders. And it's a promising climbing out of post-war world until the Soviet Union decides it wants its socialism not just to rule the Soviet Union, but to rule the world. And so they would send their KGB agitators into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Romania, Czech Republic, and they would identify groups with grievances ethnically, Bosnian Serbs, Croats, religiously, Sunni, Shia, Orthodox, economically. It didn't matter. And they would break them into groups of victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots. And they would organize protests that they would escalate into riots and violence and smashing windows and setting things on fire. And then they would co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame the new leader of the new country for all of the problems. And then they would nurture weak links in the military. And when the country got panicky enough, they would do a coup or a rigged election and replace the leader with a Soviet puppet. And the violence would die down for a little while, but when the people woke up, they realized they just gave away all their freedoms, and now they're behind the Iron Curtain. Truman does nothing. He thought the United Nations that he helped form would bring world peace, but the next president's Eisenhower, and he's faced with a problem. Iran in 1953 sides with the Soviet Union, and the leader, Mossadegh, nationalizes the oil industry in Iran. And you think, big deal. Well, wait a second. Britain has no oil fields. There's no oil fields in Britain. So in 1908, Britain formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. You know it better as BP.
Wow, British Petroleum.
And so when the leader of Iran, Mossadegh, nationalized, Britain is suddenly without, here they got a worldwide navy that runs on oil, and they're having an oil shortage. So they immediately appeal to President Eisenhower, and he approves the first CIA operation to overthrow a country's leader. It's Operation Ajax. And the CIA operative on the ground is Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. He goes over to Tehran, and he does the same thing. He recruits gangsters and mobsters and radical imams, and they stage protests and riots and attack mosques. And they co-opt the media with bribes and threats to blame Mossadegh for all the problems. And they nurture weak links in the military. And when the country gets panicky enough, they put Mossadegh under house arrest, lock him away for the rest of his life where he dies, and they replace him with the Shah of Iran, who loved America because we put him in. And the CIA did the same thing in Guatemala in 1954, in the Congo, the Dominican Republic, even Chile in 1973, and the KGB did the same thing with Brezhnev helping Yasser Arafat to start the PLO, and Brezhnev helping Castro to take over Cuba, and starting FARC in Colombia, and then hundreds of coup attempts in Africa. This is called the Cold War. And these tactics have been perfected for 70 years. And they would even implement something they called psychological operations as a part of it. What's that? Well, you want to overthrow a country's leader, you co-opt the media, you would actually have the media release false polling data ahead of a coup. So when they did the election and the popular leader lost, they would have these false polling data that said the popular leader was really unpopular.